welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Elise. I'm a creative professional and an artist. I'm really passionate about finding beauty in life's small moments. But today I wanted to share a deeply personal story with you about how losing my dad to cancer completely changed my life. It changed how I see the world and ultimately inspired my journey as an artist. If you've ever experienced loss or found yourself on an unexpected journey of self-discovery, I hope this resonates with you. I will admit I am slightly anxious to share this story only because grief and loss is such a unique journey to each person that goes through it. From the physical expressions of grief that your body has to endure to how it can tank your mental health. Loss never feels positive, but when you're on the other side of something, you are able to look back and reflect on who you were before that journey began, what was happening to you in the middle of it, and then, when a couple of years have passed between the actual event of loss and that reflection time, you're able to see your journey through grief and loss so much more holistically. Before my dad was diagnosed with cancer at the beginning of 2020, I was working in a completely different career. I was in my late 20s. I had just decided to really take my dreams seriously. I worked a career all through my 20s that while I loved it and it was deeply satisfying on one level, I knew somewhere deep down I just had this instinct and this knowing that it wasn't what I wanted to continue doing for the rest of my working years. Something I had put on the back burner was my creativity, my expression as an artist. And I don't think I really honestly felt like I could make a living doing what I wanted to do. It was always a dream I had. I ended up changing my major to something that I thought was maybe more marketable. And I think part of me did not want to face that regret that I felt of changing my major from graphic design to English. Again, English is another huge part of what I love. You will see on this channel, I'm a huge reader. I'm a writer. I love to write poetry. I like to write personal essays. Someday I would like to write a book. I'm a very multi-passionate creative individual. And I think if you're a creative on the other side of this video, you can probably see yourself in that as well. I didn't believe that I could make it on that creative path. On top of making that transition out of that career into a new one, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And this was a huge shock for my family. My dad had never really had any major health concerns. From 2020, when my dad was diagnosed, to 2022, when my dad eventually passed away, I had 2 years of really truly getting to know my dad and the person that I was as a result of his influence in my life. My dad was also a creative. He had a very tactile sense of creativity. And what I mean by that is that my dad completely drew and designed the plans for the house that I grew up in as a child. And I always looked up to my dad as this deeply creative, expressive, sensitive person. My dad celebrated my dreams. My dad was so kind. He was the kind of person who could walk into a room and make anyone feel comfortable, valued, worthy. I mean, he listened to you when you spoke. I was so lucky to grow up with a father like that, who saw me without me even having to really pull at the words to describe myself. Or, sometimes I think with parental relationships, they can be difficult because you feel like this person who raised you should see you so much better and so much clearer than they do. And with my dad, there was never really any work to get him to see me. And so, as you can imagine, the subsequent loss of that person, that father figure in my life, that person who saw me, was gone. Only 3 years later am I really understanding how his love impacted me and how his loss impacted me. My dad's cancer was pretty advanced when we found it. My dad didn't always share how he was feeling. It was hard to really know how he was feeling about his diagnosis, or, he kept it so private. And I know there was a lot of times in our family where we felt confused by how he was choosing to sort of hermit crab, not only to watch my dad lose his mobility, but to continue to go inward without us, without the family, was very hard to watch. 2.5 years after the fact, I am now able to accept that that is what my dad felt he needed to do to get through the day and to survive in that state that he was in. But it's complicated. It's complicated to look at this person who you know and love, and you don't see them anymore. It kind of just wasn't really something I was ready to accept, that my dad was actively dying. But I essentially, and my family, we all watched my dad slowly fade away over the period of 1 month. I held his hand as he took his last breath. Until you cross that threshold of a parent being alive or a loved one being alive, this isn't just about parent loss. Any kind of loss, sibling loss, child loss. There is just, every single one of us are carrying around some level of pain. I've talked about grief before on my TikTok account, and the amount of people who just want space to talk about their grief is immense. And that's part of what I want to do with this channel. Every single video I post won't be about grief, because ultimately my channel is about finding joy and beauty after grief. But in finding the joy and finding the beauty, there is the process of having to reckon with the pain of grief. Reckon with the change that it initiates in your deepest level of existence, and how that expresses itself outward. Something that I really struggled with in my early days of grief was there are no resources that I could find outside of my therapist to help me navigate being a parent to a young child and honoring the space that grief requires you to take. When I lost my dad, I had a 4.5-year-old. And that was another element that made me so angry in my grief, is the understanding that my wonderful father was leaving the life of his granddaughter, my daughter, so early. There really were no resources to explicitly help me manage my anger and my sadness that I had after my dad died, and still be a present parent. I really struggled with that. Anger is one of the stages of grief, and if you're in that anger phase, I just want to tell you, don't feel like you have failed or that grief is overtaking you. That is part of the process, and it needs to be expressed. My husband came to me 2 months after I lost my dad, and he was like, listen, I fully respect and understand what you're going through, but the anger that you're expressing on a day-to-day in how it's manifesting in our family, it's not sustainable. The anger that just overtakes after grief sometimes is just, that's all you can see. To kind of reach through the fog of that anger and tell me you have to find a different way to process this anger than what you are currently doing. It was the sort of the domino effect of what was going to come next for me. I began to look inward in a way that I don't really think I gave myself permission to before losing my dad. Loss changes the way that you see the world in a way that you really can't articulate. There are just things that you understand now that you didn't before. It gives you a perspective about your life up until that point that is so clear. You begin to think of your life in terms of how you want to be perceived and remembered when you cross that threshold into death someday. Those two realizations, as well as knowing that this is what my dad would have wanted me to do, allowed me to begin pursuing my journey into artistry in a way that I really never have dedicated time to it before. And there's something about those of us who are artists or who are creatives where you become so almost bitter that you're not the one out there creating these amazing pieces of art, whatever it is that you're drawn to creating, eventually you look around and you decide that you are sick and tired of feeling this frustration that you're not creating those things, or that you're not creating something equally powerful and beautiful. My husband's words to me, combined with this new perspective that death and grief brought me, is what triggered that journey forward. The year following my dad's passing, I began to explore what felt good to create. There were a few things that I've always loved making. For example, collages. I love making mixed media collages. I love taking memories or scraps from things I've experienced and putting them together in some sort of cryptic, symbolic image. I've also really loved watercolor, soft pastel painting, just really things that are tactile. On top of actually physically, taking classes to learn new art skills and really allowing myself to invest money in artistic supplies and creative tools, I began to feel some of that frustrated energy and the anger energy that was my first initial feelings of grief. I began to feel those move through into acceptance. And this took time. This didn't just happen within a month or two of doing this. This journey is something I will be doing for the rest of my life. 2.5 years later, there will be times when I'm going through life and my brain out of the blue remind me, your dad is dead. And it's like the shock of that loss, you go through that again and again. I have been grounded by the ability to take those feelings and express them creatively. This is my permission to you to get it from here outward. Grief needs to be expressed. The love that you had for the person that is gone doesn't go away. If you keep it inside, it's going to start to take a toll on your mental health. It's going to start to take a toll in your relationships, but most importantly, it's going to take its toll on you. Grief is one of those things that can really hamper your ability to evolve as a person if it's not being expressed. And I will not sit here and tell you that expressing grief is easy. Grief has to be expressed. I don't know where you are in your grief journey or what you're experiencing that caused you to click on this video, but I give you permission to be creative with your grief. It's interesting how some of those latent parts of our personality are actually what we need to go back to and call upon when we are going through moments of challenges and loss and difficulty and trauma. I think sometimes those parts of ourselves that we don't engage with often is the key to our own success and our own ability to live a thriving life. So in closing, I just want to say that if you've ever gone through grief, or if you are currently going through active grief, if it feels overwhelming, that is normal. But I also encourage you to use that as a doorway to self-discovery and give yourself permission to really go deep into who you are and to discover things about yourself that you never knew. For me, that was fully embracing my identity as an artist. I always had a massive reservation in identifying as an artist because I didn't go to art school. Sometimes we say these things out loud, things that we believe about ourselves, and as they're coming out of our mouth, we know they sound ridiculous, but we've somewhere along the line of our life believed these things. So am I going to just accept that and continue to live a life that doesn't feel fully satisfying? No, I can't accept that either. So all that to say, no matter where you are on your grief and loss journey, I wanted to make this channel to create space for that and also show that it is possible to find joy and beauty after grief, despite grief, and in grief. And I hope you will stick around for that journey. So if this story resonated with you, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about your journey or about what has helped you get through tough times. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you would like more content like this.